Hi, this is Jacob, and I'm going to show our wiki site here. So here's our site. This is the homepage. We use Google Sites to create this wiki, and honestly it made it a lot easier than I was expecting. I really liked using Google Sites to do this. I think it probably saved me a big headache. But anyway, here's some pictures. I got them from Pixabay, which is what our professor suggested. And I really liked that website. It was very useful and very good. We have the goal of our research down at the bottom, and we also have a logo. I made it in Canva, and you can click it and it'll take you back to the home page. You can also click on the wiki title and it'll do the same thing. But here's our menu bar, and the first subtopic that Yokumar talked about was technology in the film industry. Ashlyn talked about dirt track racing. Curry talked about technology with baseball. And I talked about virtual reality. So here's my page for virtual reality. I got all the images from Pixabay again. But my first section here just talks about how it's an advancing, it's exciting technology field, and I just give a brief definition here, and I kind of introduce VR as a topic, just generally in this first paragraph. And then I go on to speak about how VR is a form of entertainment. It's fun. I give a quote here about a market projection, which turns out to be a pretty accurate projection so far. But this paragraph is basically just to explain that it's a lucrative, it's a growing market, and it's exciting, it's fun. So VR is entertaining. But then I transition here, I talk about how it's not just for fun, we learn with VR too. And this section here just explains that VR has been seen as a powerful tool in the classroom. And I quote this same source that I got the definition for VR from. This source was all about using VR as a learning tool. It went over different topics that are being taught with VR. They mentioned welding. Later they talk about architecture, and I'll get into it. But they talk about how VR has been shown to be useful in almost any field you can think of, even a field or a topic such as English. You could envision certain topics about English or grammar using VR, and they talk about that in the article. It's kind of interesting. And one thing that they talk about in that specific article is teaching architects and using VR in the field of architecture, like on the job. And the reason they use it and utilize it is because you can create an environment, a 3D world where physics exists, and you could test certain things. You could visually see what a building might look like using VR. So teaching people about these things using VR is a really powerful tool. And this article goes into that topic at length. But I found that to be interesting because with VR and architecture, it's also really fun. Like you can tour the Vatican online on their website. It's not necessarily VR, but it is immersive. But imagine, if it was VR, imagine a version where it is interactive. It'd be pretty cool. So we talk about how VR and architecture link up in learning, right? Like we can use it as a teaching tool to teach people about architecture, but we can also have fun with it, and we can allow people to explore architecture using VR. So I liked making that section and having that link between those two ideas here. I thought it brought it all together nicely. And this source that I quote at the end here, this source talks about some software that was created recently in 2025, and it's very advanced software in terms of world generation and accuracy and detail with VR and creating 3D buildings in a VR environment. So they talk about how it's an exciting idea and how this software, just came out, and they're exploring the effects that it's had so far. So yeah, that was an interesting article too. And below all that, I have my embedded video. It's a TED Talk, and it was an interesting TED Talk. It goes back into the history of VR and like the first machines that were technically VR machines. It's pretty interesting. You can see how much technology has advanced since those first machines. But it's an interesting video. It's only, I think it was maybe like 10 minutes. So yeah, it's worth the watch. And then I have my references. And lastly, on our wiki, we have our team page. And we're all on here with our picture and just a little introduction. But we're all in there. So yep, that is our wiki.